All right, so get ready because today we are going to dive into some pretty serious biblical prophecy.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about the Millennial Kingdom,
Okay.
specifically how it's described in the book of Revelation.
All right.
You shared some really interesting excerpts from a Bible study lesson and its appendix.
Uh-huh.
And it's got everything, prophecies, resurrected saints, and even Satan making a guest appearance.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's amazing how much this idea of the millennial kingdom just captures our imagination.
Right.
And, it's not just some random idea tucked away in the Bible.
Right.
It's deeply connected to how the disciples understood Jesus's mission and their hopes for Israel.
Right. Like in Acts 1.6, where they straight up asked Jesus,
Yeah.
Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel now? That's a pretty loaded question, isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah, definitely. And Jesus' answer isn't just a simple yes or no.
Right.
It's more like he's kind of like unveiling these layers of understanding.
Okay.
If you think about John 14.1,
Yeah.
he talks about sending the Holy Spirit, the helper, then in Acts 1.7. He tells them, you don't need to know the exact timing of God's plans.
Uh-huh.
And in Luke 24.25, he even suggests their understanding of the kingdom needs a bit of an upgrade.
So it seems like Jesus is hinting at something way bigger
Yes.
and more complex than just a political kingdom, right?
Exactly. And this is where Revelation 20 really blows things wide open,
All right.
introducing this idea of a 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, the Millennial Kingdom.
Okay.
What's really striking is that imagery of an angel binding Satan for that whole period, stopping him from deceiving the nations.
That makes me think about what peace really means.
Yeah.
If Satan, who's often seen as the source of temptation and deceit,
Uh-huh.
is out of the picture for 1,000 years,
Right.
does that mean human nature itself changes?
Right.
Does everyone just automatically get along?
Yeah, those are really interesting questions,
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what that kind of peace would actually look like. How relationships would function. What role would free will play if temptation is essentially removed from the equation?
Totally. And speaking of who's involved, Revelation 20.4 mentions these judges.
Yes.
It's not exactly clear who they are, is it?
Yeah.
Are they like some heavenly jury?
Yeah, it's definitely open to interpretation.
Right.
Our source material suggests they could be Jesus' disciples.
Okay.
Linking back to Luke 22.29-30, where Jesus promises they'll share in his reign.
That makes sense, but they're not the only ones mentioned.
Right.
We've also got resurrected saints. Right?
Yes.
This whole idea of resurrection seems pretty central to the whole concept of the millennial kingdom.
Absolutely. Specifically those martyred during the tribulation period.
Okay.
They're resurrected with new, incorruptible bodies to reign with Christ.
Wow.
Imagine the impact of having people who've experienced both earthly life and heavenly glory
Right.
as part of this kingdom's leadership.
It's almost like a blending of heaven and earth in a way.
It is.
But what does reigning actually look like in this context?
Yeah.
It's not like they're going to be wearing crowns and sitting on thrones, right?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It challenges us to rethink traditional ideas of leadership and authority.
Right.
This reigning might be more about spiritual guidance,
Sure.
perfect wisdom,
Okay.
and maybe even a deeper understanding of God's will that they can then share with others.
So we've got Jesus, potentially, his
Mhm.
disciples,
Yeah.
and these resurrected saints all playing key roles.
Right.
But who else gets to experience this incredible time?
Well, our sources highlight a few more groups.
Okay.
First, you have those who lived through the tribulation,
Uh-huh.
but refused to worship the Antichrist.
Right.
Those who stayed faithful even in the face of incredible pressure.
They definitely deserve some peace and tranquility after going through all of that.
For sure. Then we have the church-age saints, those who were raptured before the tribulation began.
Right.
They return with Christ to be part of this kingdom as well.
And don't forget about the Old Testament saints.
Oh, yeah.
They're part of this amazing reunion too, right?
Yeah. That'd be like the ultimate family gathering.
Exactly. Daniel 12.2-3 even describes the righteous shining like the stars in heaven. It really paints a picture of all of God's faithful people throughout history coming together.
So this millennial kingdom isn't just about a specific time period.
Right.
It's about the culmination of God's plan for humanity,
Yeah.
bringing together people from every generation.
You got it. And what's fascinating is that this idea of a future earthly kingdom isn't unique to Revelation.
Right.
Remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2?
Oh, yeah, the one with the giant statue representing different kingdoms.
Yes.
What does that have to do with the millennial kingdom?
Well, at the end of the dream, a stone representing Jesus smashes the statue and grows into a mountain that fills the whole earth.
Wow.
It's an incredibly vivid image of God's kingdom ultimately replacing all earthly powers.
I see the connection now.
Yeah.
It's like that dream was a foreshadowing of the Millennial Kingdom, where God's rule becomes the ultimate and only authority on earth. Right. And our source material actually suggests a visualization exercise
Okay.
using a 6-foot statue and a beach ball to represent this idea.
Wow.
Imagine that a beach ball encompassing the whole world, showing the vastness of God's kingdom.
That's a great way to grasp the scale of it all.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about who's involved in the symbolic meaning.
Right.
What about the day-to-day experience? What will it actually be like to live in the Millennial Kingdom?
Well, the Old Testament offers some fascinating glimpses.
Okay.
Isaiah 11:6-9, for example, talks about peace in the animal kingdom, wolves living with lambs, leopards chilling with goats.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on.
Yeah.
Wait, so no more survival of the fittest.
Right.
That raises a fascinating question. What happens to the natural order in a world without predation?
Right.
Do lions become vegetarians? How does that even work?
That's the mind-blowing part. It
Yeah.
suggests that the very laws of nature might be altered during the Millennial Kingdom,
Wow.
reflecting a deeper harmony and peace that extends to every corner of creation.
So we're talking about a world where even the animal kingdom reflects the peace and unity of God's reign. That's incredible.
It is.
But what about the physical landscape itself?
Yeah.
Will there be changes there too?
Absolutely. Isaiah 35:1-2 describes the desert blooming, the parched land becoming a pool, the wilderness bursting with joy.
Wow.
It's like the whole earth gets a makeover, a restoration to its original beauty and abundance.
It's amazing to think about a world where everyone has enough and nature is flourishing.
It is, and it gets even more intriguing. Isaiah 65:25 says there will be no more carnivorous animals.
Wow, lions eating straw now. That's a sight I'd love to see.
I know, right?
It really makes you think about the depth of transformation that's being described here.
Yeah.
It's not just about political or social change. It's a fundamental shift in the very fabric of creation.
You're absolutely right. And speaking of abundance, Amos 9.1315 promises incredible harvests, mountains dripping with sweet wine hills overflowing with milk and honey.
Sounds delicious.
Right.
But what about Jerusalem? It seems to hold a special significance in all of this.
It does.
What role does it play?
Micah 4.1-4 describes Jerusalem as the center of worship for all nations, a place where people from every corner of the earth come to learn God's ways and walk in his paths.
So it's not just a transformed earth, but a transformed humanity as well, all united in their worship of God.
Exactly. The Millennial Kingdom isn't just about living in a paradise.
Yeah.
It's about a restored relationship with God that permeates every aspect of life.
It makes a lot of sense. But our source material also mentions something called replacement theology, which seems to be a point of debate.
Right.
When it comes to understanding the Millennial Kingdom, can you explain what that is?
Sure. Replacement theology in a nutshell is the belief that the church has replaced Israel in God's plan.
Okay.
And the promises originally made to Israel are now spiritualized for the church.
But our source material seems to be pushing back against that idea,
It is.
emphasizing that God's promises to Israel remain distinct and the church is a separate entity. This sounds like a pretty complex theological discussion.
It definitely is. And within Christianity, there are a variety of viewpoints on this issue.
Right.
It's important to remember that we're dealing with interpretations of ancient texts.
Yep.
And there's room for thoughtful discussion and disagreement.
Okay, so we need to approach this topic with sensitivity and an open mind.
Absolutely. But even with these theological debates, the concept of the Millennial Kingdom still offers a powerful vision of hope and restoration.
That's a good point. So just to recap what we've covered so far, we've got a diverse cast of characters inhabiting this kingdom, a radically transformed earth, the end of Satan's influence, and Jerusalem taking center stage. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
It really is. And what I find most fascinating is how the Millennial Kingdom isn't just some abstract future event.
Right.
It has implications for us right now.
Now that's where I get really curious. What do you mean by that? How can something that might happen in the future possibly impact our lives today?
Well, the Millennial Kingdom raises some really profound questions about our understanding of time, and judgment and eternity.
Okay.
For example, if we believe in this future reality where God's reign is fully established, how does that shape our choices and actions in the present?
I see what you mean. It's like knowing the ending of a movie can change how you watch the beginning.
Right.
If we know that ultimate justice and peace are coming, does that make our current struggles seem less significant?
That's a really thought-provoking point,
Yeah.
It definitely challenges us to think about how our present actions contribute to or maybe even hinder the coming of God's kingdom.
It also makes me wonder about the nature of faith.
Yeah.
If we're living with this assurance of a future reality, does that diminish the need for faith in the present?
That's a great question, and I think it gets to the heart of what faith really is.
Okay.
It's not just believing in something that hasn't happened yet. It's about trusting in God's character and promises, regardless of our circumstances.
So even though we have this glimpse into the future, we're still called to live by faith in the here and now.
Exactly, and that faith should inspire us to live differently,
Okay.
to be agents of peace and reconciliation in a world that desperately needs it.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
But honestly, sometimes it's hard to reconcile these beautiful descriptions of the Millennial Kingdom with the pain and brokenness we see in the world today.
Right.
How do we hold on to that hope when things feel so messy?
I think that's where the imagery of the Millennial Kingdom becomes so important. It's not just a description of a future event. It's a reminder of God's power and faithfulness. If he can transform a world ravaged by sin into a paradise of peace and justice,
Right.
then he can certainly work in and through our present challenges.
It's like a reminder that God's story isn't over yet,
Yes.
and the best is still to come.
Yes.
And that gives us hope to persevere even when things are tough.
Absolutely. And it also challenges us to look for glimpses of that future kingdom breaking into our present reality.
Yeah.
Every act of kindness, every step towards justice, every moment of genuine connection, these are all signs that God's kingdom is at work even now.
So we don't have to wait for the Millennial Kingdom to experience the reality of God's love and transforming power.
Exactly. The Millennial Kingdom isn't just a destination, it's a journey. And every step we take in obedience and faith is a step closer to that ultimate reality.
I love that analogy. It's like we're not just passively waiting for something to happen.
Right.
We're actively participating in the unfolding of God's plan. But if the Millennial Kingdom is about more than just a physical location or a time period,
Yeah.
what is it ultimately about? What's the core message or takeaway for us?
For me, the Millennial Kingdom ultimately points to the restoration of all things.
Okay.
It's about God's desire to heal the brokenness of sin, to reconcile humanity to himself, and to bring creation back into alignment with his original design.
So it's not just about streets paved with gold or lions eating straw. It's about a fundamental transformation of our hearts, our relationships, and our understanding of what it means to be human.
Exactly, and it's about living in a world where God's love and justice are the guiding principles, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole.
That's a pretty radical vision, isn't it? It makes you wonder how different our world would be if we truly lived with that kind of mindset. But this whole idea of a 1,000-year reign raises a question for me.
Yeah.
What happens after those 1,000 years are up? Does everything just go back to the way it was before?
That's a great question, and it's one that has sparked a lot of debate and discussion among theologians. Some believe that the Millennial Kingdom is a literal 1,000-year period, followed by a final judgment and the creation of a new heaven and new earth.
So the Millennial Kingdom is like a transition period, a time of preparation for something even more glorious.
That's one way to look at it. Others see the 1,000 years as symbolic, representing a long but finite period of peace and righteousness before the ultimate consummation of God's kingdom.
So whether it's a literal 1,000 years or a symbolic representation, the core message is the same.
Right.
God's plan for humanity culminates in a perfect and eternal state of being.
Yes.
But even if we can't fully grasp the timeline or the details, what does this whole concept of the Millennial Kingdom teach us about God's character?
I think it reveals some really profound truths about who God is.
Okay.
First, it shows us that he's a God of promises throughout the Old Testament. He made covenants with his people, and the Millennial Kingdom is the ultimate fulfillment of those promises.
Right.
It demonstrates his unwavering faithfulness and his commitment to seeing his plans through to completion.
It's like a reassurance that no matter how messy things get in the present, God is still in control, and he's working to bring about his ultimate purpose.
Exactly. It also highlights his incredible love and grace. Even though humanity has rebelled against him time and time again, he still desires to restore us to a right relationship with himself.
Right.
The Millennial Kingdom is a testament to his relentless pursuit of our hearts and his desire for us to experience the fullness of his love and blessing.
It's almost like a cosmic love story where God is patiently wooing us back to himself even when we resist. But there's another aspect of God's character that seems particularly relevant here.
Yeah.
His justice.
Right.
We've talked about the peace and harmony of the Millennial Kingdom,
Uh-huh.
but what about those who have rejected God's offer of salvation?
Right.
What happens to them?
That's a question that's often raised in discussions about the Millennial Kingdom. While the Bible describes a time of peace and righteousness, it also makes it clear that there will be a final judgment where those who have rejected God will face the consequences of their choices.
So even though the Millennial Kingdom is about restoration and reconciliation, it doesn't erase the reality of human responsibility and accountability.
Exactly. God's love and grace are incredibly vast, but they don't negate the need for justice. The Millennial Kingdom doesn't eliminate the consequences of sin. Rather, it highlights the incredible mercy and patience of God, who allows for a time of repentance and transformation before the final judgment.
That makes sense. It's like God is giving everyone the opportunity to choose him, to experience his goodness, and to turn away from their sin. But ultimately, he respects our free will and allows us to make the final decision.
You got it. And that brings us back to the present moment.
Yeah.
If the Millennial Kingdom is about the culmination of God's plan, then our choices today have eternal significance.
Wow.
We're not just living for ourselves. We're part of a much bigger story, and our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond our own lives.
That's a pretty sobering thought, but it's also incredibly empowering. It means that our lives have purpose, that we can make a difference, and that even small acts of obedience and love can contribute to the advancement of God's kingdom.
Absolutely. And that's why studying the Millennial Kingdom isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to align our lives with God's purposes, to be agents of peace and reconciliation in a broken world, and to live with the hope and anticipation of the future he has promised.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the Millennial Kingdom, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to ponder?
I'd say it's this. The Millennial Kingdom isn't just a distant event to be passively awaited. It's a reality that we can begin to experience and participate in today,
Right.
Through our choices, our actions, and our relationships, we can embody the values of God's kingdom and be part of bringing his transforming power into our world.
That's a beautiful and inspiring message. And for our listener who's eager to explore this topic further, where would you recommend they start? As we've been unpacking this whole concept of the Millennial Kingdom, it struck me that the Bible doesn't just tell us about the what, what happens. It also gives us some pretty fascinating glimpses into the how.
Right.
Like, how will this incredible transformation actually take place?
That's a great observation. And one of the most intriguing aspects, I think, is the role of education and worship in shaping the culture of the Millennial Kingdom.
Okay, now that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about Micah 4.2, where it talks about people from all nations streaming to Jerusalem to learn from the Lord. It really emphasizes that learning and understanding God's ways will be central to life during this time.
So it's not just about kicking back and enjoying paradise. There's a real emphasis on growth and knowledge.
Exactly. It suggests this deep desire to align our lives with God's will, and that's where worship comes in.
Okay.
Isaiah 2.3 talks about going up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, not just to visit, but to learn his ways and walk in his paths. It paints a picture of a world where worship is woven into the very fabric of daily life.
Wow, that's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
Like, the whole world becomes a temple, the place where every action and thought is directed toward honoring God.
And that's what makes the Millennial Kingdom so compelling. It's not just about external changes.
Right.
It's about a radical transformation of the human heart, a restoration of our relationship with God, and as a result, with each other.
It's like the ultimate goal isn't just a perfect world, but a perfect people.
Yes.
People who reflect God's love, justice, and holiness.
You got it. And that transformation doesn't have to wait. It starts now in the choices we make, the way we treat others, the way we seek to understand and embody God's will in our lives.
Okay, I'm getting chills here. But we've also talked about this idea that there will be a final judgment after the Millennial Kingdom.
Right.
If God's reign is so complete and everyone is learning his ways, why is a final judgment even necessary?
That's a really profound question, and it highlights the tension between God's desire for all to be saved and the reality of human free will. Even in a world permeated by God's presence, the choice to accept or reject him ultimately rests with each individual.
So the final judgment is less about punishment and more about respecting the choices that people have made,
Right.
even with all the knowledge and experience of God's goodness.
I think that's a very insightful way to look at it. It's about honoring the dignity of human choice and recognizing that true love can't be coerced.
That makes a lot of sense. But this all leads me to another huge question.
Yeah.
What happens to us after this final judgment? Does the story just end there?
Now you're getting to the heart of it. And this is where we move from the realm of prophecy to the realm of hope,
Okay.
of what we believe lies beyond the veil of time. The Bible speaks of a new heaven and a new earth, a place where God dwells with his people in perfect and eternal communion.
So the Millennial Kingdom, even with its incredible transformation, is just a prelude to something even greater, something that transcends our current understanding of time and space.
Exactly. It's like the Millennial Kingdom is a taste, a glimpse of the ultimate reality that awaits those who choose to follow God. It's a promise that our story doesn't end with death, but rather it's a transition to an existence beyond our wildest imaginations.
I don't know about you, but talking about all of this fills me with a sense of awe and wonder. It really puts our everyday worries and concerns into perspective, doesn't it?
It really does, and I think that's one of the most powerful takeaways from studying the Millennial Kingdom.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves, a story that stretches back to the beginning of time and continues into eternity.
And that no matter what we're going through right now,
Right.
we can hold on to the hope of a future where God's love and justice reign supreme.
Absolutely. So, dear listener, as you go about your week, I encourage you to carry this sense of hope and wonder with you. Let it shape your perspective, inspire your actions, and remind you that the best is yet to come.
Beautifully said.
Ah.
And that, my friend, wraps up our deep dive into the Millennial Kingdom.